player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today is the Lucio Light of Brilliance character review. I did want to do the 2P character review, but I saw that JB79 just came out with this yesterday, and honestly, I probably will land on the same conclusions as he did, so I figured swap it up, given that we had two different characters to review this week. So yeah, today's character review, pretty standard stuff of the character overview, all the stat analysis that leads up to the report card where we look at the stats in the context of the rest of his kit and the game compared to other characters, the general thoughts where I can kind of highlight some big important things I want to talk just generally about, passives and counter abilities, the job abilities and auto priority, the TMR review, job-based vision card eligibility, some sample bills, and then some Truststones and general optimization toward the end there. But kicking things off, brand new light unit added here to Global. They've given him the unique main job of Warrior of Luminescence with the Strider and Pugilist subjobs. He does equip swords as part of the Sword Warrior group, which we have not seen since Bartz's release. It's been quite some time now. He does equip armor, helm, and accessories as a bulkier kind of unit with a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit. And I definitely think he is a 50 faith candidate. There's really no status effects in his kit that you really want to leverage. A lot of his self-healing mechanics that do exist are percentage-based, so the faith doesn't really affect it all that much. But just talking briefly about the job itself, the max range is 4 squares away, so actually a little bit short range compared to what we're used to, with only 1 AoE and 3 single target scaling abilities. From a resistance standpoint, he's got 20% to both slash and pierce, with a 10% to magic. Those are the 3 most common types we've seen as of late, but strike is certainly making a resurgence, and he's minus 5% to strike and minus 10% to missile. So there are some negatives there. Not the end of the world. From an ailment perspective, 50% to poison and disable. We've seen obviously a big uptick in poison as of late, 10% to paralyze. I'm not terribly concerned about these given his faith value as well. For the mastery ability though, they give him HP of 10%, elemental attack of 10, and here's the cool thing, it's not just for light units like most units are, it's for all allies, which is actually kind of unique. They gave that to the original Lucio, they did it for him here too. They've given him 10 AoE res and 30% acquired AP, and the dream ability is 20% attack, with 20% reaction block rate as well, and we'll see how this kind of interacts with the rest of his kit. But for now, the base stat analysis, base HP, definitely in the higher echelon of things here, 4,052 base HP. He is in a tier that even most recent units aren't in. He's right outside where I think the majority of the tanks all end up falling in the game, so definitely a big part of his brawling nature, which I want to talk about obviously a bunch through this presentation. The base attack is the highest in the game. He now has dethroned, was it Flagbreak last? I can't remember who it was, but highest base attack in the game at 438. I actually really like this too. We'll talk about why in the concept of the kit. The base agility, a little bit above the median here at 57. That's basically where the average amount of units follow. So this is not a weakness. It's a decent enough starting spot. The base dexterity also just a step ahead of where many units are. It's not necessarily a strength of his, but definitely nice to see that the dexterity overall is just a small bit ahead of where the largest bucket of units fall in the game. And then base luck, kind of the same concept here. It's not a terribly strong base luck. It's still under the 75th percentile, but obviously above average, obviously above the median, still in a pretty good place, all things considered. And so when we look at the total stat analysis, as we sort of like transition those charts into this one, base stat-wise, he's in a very, very healthy starting spot on all 5 of the metrics. When you incorporate the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, the HP takes a very slight step back here, obviously, but the attack still retains being the highest attack out of all the units from a total and A perspective. Agility gets a nice bump there. Dexterity and luck fall just a smidge, but not materially so that, they gave him some good things on the board here. Definitely focused on the attack stat. 10 agility points is fine. Overall, though, he's a really good stat character. Now, the problem is characters are more than their stats. They're really more about their abilities, but the stats are important to making sure they can ensure the job as designed. I think they nailed it here with Lucio. Now for agility, he comes in at 81 agility. There's no passives to increase it, and this is including the 15% and 8% main and sub agility vision cards. He's in a higher tier than most units are, but when you start comparing him to units with passives, which is this green line, he does fall, I guess, behind a little bit. 81 is the mathematical average, and he's right there at 81. So it's not a weakness, but it's average. The crit hit and crit avoid, now although the base dexterity was that step ahead, they didn't really give him any crit rate nodes on the board, which many damage dealers get. So he ends up kind of falling back to earth here, but Then again, should you pump him up at dexterity percent, that'll certainly yield higher results. The crit avoidance is not really a strength either. Neither of these are a weakness of his. They're just pretty par for the course. They're pretty average. Now for the accuracy, he does have a passive that I prefer to have on most of the time. So innately speaking, not a terribly accurate unit. He's about average. That's totally fine. But he does have a passive that does give him 25. He does have a second passive that will give him another 20, but I think that's overkill. You probably will never use that. But if you consider that one passive with the 25%, he does jump up to like just barely under that echelon of what I would consider like a really accurate unit. So he's right on the cusp. There's no guaranteed hit in the kit though. So there's some pieces to work with, but top tier evade might be slightly difficult for him to work with. And then the evasion perspective, I don't consider him an evade unit, but then again, I didn't consider Helen of the Black Rose an evade unit either. And we've obviously seen Light is kind of the exception just with some of the vision card economy that like you can get to this pseudo evade level that's kind of like catches people off guard. He's only 4% less evade than Helen of the Black Rose. So use her as your barometer for comparison where, yeah, I wouldn't consider a high evade unit. It really only works in like one small iteration, but like, we've seen that it's worked. I just don't think you should rely on it for him. I don't think that's where his main upside is. But we get to the report card now. Overall effective HP is an A+. Now, he is like slightly below a couple of the top units in the game. Griffith and Faris are still the king and queen of effective HP, but he's real close. 2 defense, no spirit innately, but he does come with 10 AoE res, 15 unit res, 12% all element res. That's as good as you'll get for most units in covering all your bases. We saw the base HP is relatively high, so yeah, effective HP, he's in a pretty good spot. The minus 10% to missile, the minus 5% to strike, sure, not a great thing. That's kind of weighing him down, but he's got a ton of tools to make up for that in the survivability, which I'm going for an A. He does have a honeycomb barrier buff, kind of like Squall does, and he's also got 15% all element res on that, so that's a definite huge bump up for survivability. He's got another buff for 20 unit res, 40 elemental chain res, and a just pure 15% physical and magic damage reduction for all incoming attacks. So those two things stacked together, obviously nuts. He's got a counter ability that's a 60% chance to proc on slash and magic damage only that will restore 10% of his HP, and he will regen either 15% or 30% of his health upon killing an enemy. So yeah, survivability there is through the roof for those first 3 turns of the fight, but even effective HP wise, once those fade, he's in a really good spot. Now damage, I'm also going with an A- here. I do have slash res penetration concerns, but 90 defense pen after his AoE, totally fine there. He's got a physical barrier breakdown on a select 2. He's got a really good attack percent buff, and obviously that base attack will scale exceptionally well. He'd also have a 10% physical damage increase on his passive, so I think his damage will be good, but it's just the slash res pen concerns. I think he's slightly behind where the top tier slashers are. Not by much, but I think it's noticeable. Then again, he also has, we'll see soon, passives that can change his select 2 from a slash type attack to a strike or a pierce type attack, kind of like the OG Lucio. So if that's a problem, I think there's ways around it. So overall, I think A- is still a pretty fair grade. The agility, I'm going with a C+ here. He is faster than your average unit with no passives equipped, 81 versus 78. But with passives equipped, he's right at the UR average of 81. So I will round up a little bit here for the agility. The accuracy, going with a B+ here as well. That 25 accuracy on the main passive could get another 20 theoretically, but likely not in your builds. He's got decent enough innate accuracy overall. The evasion, going with a C here. Again, Helen of the Black Rose-esque in terms of evasion. It's there, but really not ideal. And then movement, I'm going with a D here. No move or jump options for him anywhere in the kit. The auto ease of use, I'm going with a B here. Now, he fits very easily into Mono Light, so I think for most people, that'll be a very easy build to really equip him. The buff rotation is easy enough, but there is some risk of repetition with this buff rotation, which I know for your average player can get kind of difficult to manage. There's some low bait potential though because of his short range abilities, so I also consider that a thing to watch out for, that if characters have a range of 6 on many of their attacks, oftentimes they can fight or get ahead earlier. Maybe they outpace the tank because they move forward to attack, and maybe they miss out on a buff. There's some complications there, but he's not one of them. So although the AI might be a little bit difficult for a average player not thinking that hard to really master, I think the fact that he's fits in great with Mono Light is a nice buff as well, that you'll be using him with characters you're familiar with. Now, the game disruption, I'm going with a B+ here. I do think he could be best in slot for light teams in terms of adding that character to it, but I don't think it overpowers many of the top meta units. He's competitive, but I don't think he overpowers them in that matchup. And even then, when you talk about whether or not you use him or Bartz or Winged Stern, he's just different than the other two. So I'm giving him a B plus here because he's a light unit. That's obviously goes very well for many units in the game. That if you're light or dark, you just get a widely huge pull rate, and on that factor alone, they can disrupt the game. But kit wise, I don't know if it's like all that exceptional. It's really good though. But passives, I'm going with an A here. Exceptional passives, really fun flexibility, as we'll see soon. The counter ability is going with a B plus here. It is a great passive, but the fact that it's limited to only slash or magic attacks, kind of a downside. But then again, those are the two most popular attack types in the game, barring strike. So overall, I do like what that counter ability does. The overall job and kit, I'm going with an A minus here. I've come around to liking his main job a little bit more. We'll talk on the next slide. But he's kind of the perfect Swiss Army knight to thrive in many metas. But the lack of range in AoE attacks does stick out to me. There's not necessarily weaknesses in the kit. I just don't think it's like a meta-defining kit. I think it's kind of like ketchup. Like it'll really go well on everything. And obviously people still love it and use it all the time. But it's not the highest quality sauce you could be putting on your meal. And for the final grade, though, I'm going with a B plus here. He's a very, very good unit, but I don't think he's better than most top meta units. He's, to me, like a foundational piece for how they're going to build something. We'll talk about that right now. The general thoughts, he's missing several things I like to see, and it's maybe not a bad thing. He's got no diamond AoE. It's only one cross hit, which, could be okay. There's a lot of damage mechanics right now that do fit, damage reduction the larger the AoE size. The fact that he doesn't have a diamond AoE means that he'll do more damage against those units, so that's not the worst thing. He does not have an agility passive or any kind of move or jump passive. I don't like that because it means whatever his agility value is, he's basically always around that, and you can't really play with like turn order things by adjusting that agility or movement based things in terms of how far he can go if he has to go 4 squares to buff a teammate or if you want him to front line a little faster. So I don't like that. He's hyper short range overall without a really strong filler buff. I think of someone like Reagan, who's very short range but has chakra on the sub job. That chakra is a major high impact ability that if a unit's not in range and he can use chakra as he gets closer on someone that may be low health, that's a game changer. Lucio doesn't really have that same buff though. He's got one, but it's not nearly as good, so I don't love that. The slash res pen concerns, as a comparison, A2 has 60 innately, he has 40. It's not the end of the world. There are slash res pen cards. Light has one, and Warrior will get one very near here in the future. And then again, he has passives that can change them to pierce or strike attacks, so it's not the end of the world. And the select twos, they're not as impressive or they're not as oppressive balance-wise as they once were, where obviously unit res is way through the roof, or our team compositions have changed, so it's not really like tank DPS support anymore, where it used to like bypass a lot of the game theory. So although it's really good, it's not oppressive, and he's got no imperils or crush abilities in the kit, so in terms of like damage output, you're really just kind of relying on the good old-fashioned attack percent, like defense pen and slashers pen. So it's not the end of the world. There's a lot there, and I have a glass half full on some of these. Now, he does seem like a foundational unit for Warrior, packed with utility, where he's got a Re-Raiser move, a Courage move, Physical Barrier break, Protector move on his Limit break, and he does on buff have a Dispel of, dispel enemy buffs for 3 turns upon hit. So there's a ton there as like an equalizer. And the Courage and Re-Raiser move is hyper short range, which to me at a first initial impression, means that it's easily sealable by units like Helena and Vivi. Zidane you don't see much, but obviously Zidane has the range as well. But I'm going to talk more about this in a second. I actually don't hate that for the concept of his character. He is a primo maxed reincarnation unit. I never say that in these character reviews, but because of what his effective HP is, because of what the base attack stat is, he is a unit that will scale very disproportionately well with a reincarnation overall. He's going to function far more effectively the more you can pump into him from that perspective. He does also have a really nice rainbow incentive with the 10% HP and elemental attack to all allies, not just light allies, on his mastery ability, so that's kind of a nice feather in his cap. He's a really great brawl unit, and I'm going to talk through the Re-Raise and Courage move here. You get that 12% all element res. You can have another 10% with the original Lucio sword, which I do like a lot on him. The 15 unit res, the 10 AoE res. The magic and slash counter restores 10% HP. His priority buff is a 20 unit res, 40 elemental chain res, 15% physical and magical reduction. The secondary buff is the honeycomb barrier, the 15% further of all elemental res, and you can restore 15% or 30% HP upon killing an enemy. The way I see this, the character, is that he has these hyper strong buffs. Most of them only last 3 turns, But the idea is that you draw the fight out long enough that you wait for enemy buffs and debuffs to expire. He obviously has the survivability to outlast many of them, and then once they do, you can kind of end the fight definitively. That, sure, maybe the re-raise and courage will get sealed early, but by the time that seal wears off, when those enemy units are like one hit, Lucio has the ability to walk up to him, kill them, and just remove the dispel entirely at that point. So I think the concept is basically like use the strength of the first 3 turns to really just like outlast your opponents, but then once that fades, you just step on their neck, and that high attack stat and the removal of re-raise or courage just end the fight definitively at that point. Now, when we look at the passive abilities, I'm going to talk through 2 different types here. The red ones are the ones I like the most. The yellow are the subs. So Power to Protect Worlds is the best one here. That's the 15 unit res, all elemental res of 12%, slash res pen of 40, and 10% physical damage. You will never not have this on. You will always have this on. The Natural Instincts is the one that you might flex. Now, I like this one second because it's your 40 defense pen, it's your 25 accuracy. But should you ever want to tap into his Select 2 ability that we'll see in a second, you can change the attack type from slash to pierce or strike. If you want to do that, you equip one of these passives instead, and if you do, you would sub Natural Instincts out for this one. So you would still gain 40 defense pen, you would trade that, you would lose your accuracy, but you'd get 12% pierce and magic res. So you have some flexibility on attack types while maintaining the 40 defense pen. You gain a little bulk, but you lose the accuracy. The other ones here, Warrior Spirit, Flurry Enhancement, they're fine. I don't think you're going to equip them most times. And the counter abilities. So Healing Scintillation is my favorite here. It's a 60% chance to proc. It's for slash and magic damage only, where he'll restore HP 10% and 10 AP. I haven't mentioned that yet. That's obviously a part of the Brawl idea where you last longer in the fight. That should you proc this a couple times and restore some AP, that means you have longer damage uptime. It's overall a really good thing. I think it's better than the others by far. Now for the main job buffs, the priority buff is the teammate one. It's actually this kind of fun AoE ranged one, kind of like Starlight Elena has on her main ability. It will repeat those, so you have to be careful about how you use it, but 20 unit res, I've already talked through it. You know what these buffs are. The second one is the single buff. It's the Honeycomb, the 40% attack buff as well, which is a massively good, damage amplification for him. I love both of these buffs. For the main job offensive abilities, again, all 4 of these are slash oriented. The dual glint slash is the one that you can flex to either strike or pierce those should you equip that passive instead. He's got very high modifiers here. 3 out of the 4 are 200% modifiers. You have the Dispel Re-Raise on a Select 2 on the lowest cost job, the Dispel Courage on the second one here that will also restore either 15% or 30%. I'll talk about that in a second. The Dual Glint Slash is a physical barrier break as well, and Blade of Luminosity is his AoE. You'll typically always open the Blade of Luminosity, I would imagine, for the 40 defense pen. That'll maximize his damage. Only 4 squares away is the max range here. The thing I'm kind of confused upon that I can't tell from WOTV stats is that both of these abilities have the ability to recover AP when an enemy is killed. One is for 15%, one is for 30%. I'm not sure which is which, but the bottom line is that you're recovering some HP upon killing an enemy. So this is the bread and butter of the main job. The Limit Burst here is a really good one, but still 4 squares away. It's a double hit. It's a Select 3, though. It's basically an Elias Stag Impact, where it will dispel Protect on all 3 and decrease CT of 15% for all 3 of those units. This is a great early limit break to kind of like change the turn rotation, build up some late slash chains, if you will. The Select 3 obviously is very powerful. Only range height of 1, so not exactly as oppressive as hers in terms of the range or the height, but overall still a really, really strong limit break. 58 AP, a little expensive, but we'll get around that. So the main sub-job here, Warrior of Luminescence. This one's okay. The Dazzling Light, this is really for going against like hyper evade units, in my opinion, where it's got no damage on it. So it's only if his hit rate is 0, I really think. That's really the most common time you'll see that used. The Domain of Brilliance as a buff is honestly not the worst buff either. Obviously being diamond shaped is a thing that we love to see. It's light and dark res of 15%. It's the dark healer of 20%. It will stack, if you go back to his buffs, with the all elemental resistance of 15% here. So again, being a short range unit, you do have the opportunities to maybe fit in a third buff here. And this is not the worst third buff, but obviously niche for the light and dark matchup. So for that reason, it's okay. Very matchup specific. The other ones here, Strider is a sub job. I don't love this one. I don't like any of the offensive abilities here. The only thing I see as an upside is maybe Call of the Wild, where, again, you're talking about a main buff on the main job that does have the ability to repeat This one can too. If two teammates walk nearby him, he'll just run in circles rebuffing. So there's some trickiness to using this Call of the Wild buff with the main job buff already. But this is not the worst thing to lean into. I'm going to be playing with this, but I do think my favorite at the moment is the Pugilist for really no other reason than the breathing technique, to be honest. Same thing with Demon Purger, where obviously the idea of him as a brawl unit, he's going to take a lot of hits, means the modifier of this ability will ramp up over time. It's also the 30% damage absorption, and breathing technique being a short range unit, if he's low and he can't hit an enemy with an ability, he's got no AP, he'll use breathing technique, and that'll work on second fights too, I think, also. So overall, I like both of what these things have to offer the most out of these two sub-jobs. They're good, not my favorite, but they're good. Now for the TMR review, this is a amazing TMR. Now, it's a teammate ability that will, again, repeat, so some trickiness in how you use it, but it's an accessory, number one. 2 casts, it's great. 12 defense on an accessory is certainly nice. The ability itself is primo. 40 defense pen for 3 turns, and 30% debuff weakening for self. The fact that you can give that defense pen for himself and an ally is some great, gearing potential and passive flexibility potential. The debuff weakening of 30 that you can finally put on any character, basically, is 2 thumbs up. Really, really great that they've added this as a TMR. This is one of my new favorites to potentially wrinkle into these brawl teams. Now for the job-based vision cards, there are some existing affinities at the moment. Axe has 2 of them. It has a unit scaling card and an agility scaling card. Not my favorite matchup because I think most probably passed on the Chef Oldoa or Too Many Cooks in the Kitchen card as of late. Staff Black Mage is very viable, though. The Ash and Lucio vision card, which is technically the one that just came out. This one's New Year's Banquet, the Hollow vision card that's running right now. Does have synergies with Staff Black Mage. In Order to Change the World also has the agility, so I do like that matchup. There's obviously a couple other potential cards that you can flex in there, but Sword Knight is another great candidate where it also overlaps with the future Lucio vision card. It's not here yet, but it will be. And you also have the Lord of the Hallow Eve that overlaps. So these are the best synergies overall, just given what the unit and agility percent vision cards are. So that's the rainbow capabilities. I don't recommend like mono sword warrior teams because it's probably a little one-dimensional in terms of just being pure damage dealers, but Fryevi is on here, so like that kind of changes things a little bit as a potential support to sustain that team. I actually don't hate that synergy, but they do have some really good cards here. Again, in the future, this future Lucio card is one of the best ones for this cast of characters with the unit res, the slash res pen, and the slash attack. That's all 3 things right down the middle. They do have a variety of agility cards as well that you can flex. A couple good attack percent scaling ones too. Obviously, the Halloween Lucio vision card is like one of the best vision cards for nailing both the luck and the agility. There's a lot to like for this class. The problem with Sword Warrior has always been that the characters are very much below average compared to many other job categories, but that's why Lucio is a foundational piece of this class. If you don't have Lucio, I would think it'd be very hard to ever use Sword Warriors for the future in the next 6 to 8 months. Now, for the general optimization, you have the Starlight Sword and the Star Gleam Sword. The Starlight Sword's the original Lucio sword. I like that best, to be honest, for the HP of 10, or for the all elemental res of 10%. Star Gleam Sword has some extra slash res pen, but the 8 AoE res is inferior, so I don't like that as much. It's slightly more niche, I think. And Sword of Light is still a really good option, though, just for the offensive output that it brings. I think offensively, Sword of Light is the strongest of these, but Starlight Sword is more his bread and butter of the build you want to lean into. The other equipment's, pretty standard stuff for the armors. I do like Alex Ring no matter what. And Genji Glove, he does have the bulk to pull it off, but still not my favorite. We've seen this accessory kind of fade a little more as of late. For the Espers, the standard Dark Odin, Bahamut Odin, and Ultros are my 4 favorite DPS Espers for everybody. Minotaur is definitely a choice here, though, because he's a light-oriented unit. Then obviously you have the light attack, you have the dark res for that matchup as well. And then Full Disc is good for the magic meta, just because of what you have for the magic res nodes and the 10% magic reduction. That is a brawl unit. That's a pretty good Esper to survive. And the TMR is pretty standard stuff here in terms of the ones that are haste orientated, keen blade potential, haste to spell, get the move +1, jump +1 on the Kane TMR. Overall, I really like what he has for the equipment options. Now for the sample builds, I went for a couple that one is mono light, not mono lightning. I went for Helen of the Black Rose and Sylvie team, where, the idea is basically have Sylvie kind of keep Lucio and Helena up as they just kind of do damage and outlast in the fight. There's a couple things you can flex here. The Bahamut Vision card is nice that it's both unit res and agility. It means you can free up your 3rd slot For this one, I chose the one that has the slash res pen for light units. It's the Final Fantasy 14 card, but you could theoretically put any light card here. It doesn't have to be that one. Same thing for the subvision cards. I went for the other 14 card that has the light attack and the dark res, and I do like the Elena vision card just for the luck percent and the strike res, where he's got negative strike res. There's obviously kind of an upswing in that right now. I like luck percent just for accuracy's sake. I think it's good for all their units to have a little bit built in there. So you can certainly flex some things. From the equipment perspective, I went with the Maximilian armor. Again, really bulky armor. And I went with the Dialdo TMR because I am using spirit runes in this build. For the passives, I used exactly what I recommended in the passive section. And yeah, for Truststones, this is what I'm working with on the left side, right side. The left side's very standard for the meta we're in. The right side here, you don't see attack percent because the Starlight Sword already has attack percent on it. So I threw in the light attack 10 here instead, and the total stats are in a pretty good spot here. You're almost at 11,000 HP, 26 defense and spirit, 1,500 attack stat here, 110 agility, which is certainly, very, very competitive with many characters at the moment. Some nice dexterity stats here because of the Jaden Vision card that he's up to 512 dexterity. That'll help the crit rate a lot. 35 unit res, 30 area res. They're fine. Definitely above average, but not mind-blowing. The 40% reaction block. I think the real big thing here is the elemental res that he's got built in already, where he's at 54% dark res innately based off this current build with the Esper and whatnot. The rest of them are 20% plus, not including what you'll get from your buffs. And his defense can't be broken. You have 100% debuff res. He does have a ton of modifiers here too. 102 light attack and 57 slash attack, 5 human killer. He's at 50 defense pen at the moment. That'll get up to 90 after he uses AoE. 75% slash res pen here thanks to that Final Fantasy 14 vision card in the main slot. 15% debuff weakening, and a 10% physical and magic damage reduction on top of what his buff will give because of what the Maximilian armor here has. So from a stat perspective, this is like fantastic brawl unit potential because of these elemental res that you see here. Now the second build is a sword warrior team. It's coincidentally another mono light team. I thought this is kind of a fun one that all three of these units are part of that class, that if you wanted to go with a build with Warrior of Light like leading the charge and Bards just being that secondary slash damage unit to kind of like do some follow-up damage and build up some slash chains and whatnot. Vision card wise, I still went with the light-oriented AoE card here with Dark Bahamut on Warrior of Light. I did use the new Lucio vision card here, figuring it's a new unit, might as well include the new vision card. I went for the Ultros Esper to kind of ramp up his defense pen, and the Minotaur vision card here in the sub slot, where this is great for their attack stat overall. I didn't really change anything else here from a Truststone set or an equipment perspective, but I just wanted to compare how, the other team was 2 magic-oriented units, this is 2 physical-oriented units, switch up the Espers and whatnot. He's got roughly similar HP, about 10,500, 29 defense, 38 spirit. The attack stat's way higher here because the Minotaur subvision card, 1,700 attack stat, still at 111 agility. The unit AoE res is roughly the same. The element resistances too are roughly similar, but you do see the dark res falling significantly here, only down to 19 dark res, but he gains 52 elemental chain res in this build. That's certainly nice. The modifiers fall a little bit, surprisingly, just because of the vision cards and the Esper, that he's down to 60 light attack and 55 slash attack, but 20 human killer as well. And then here from a defense pen perspective, 70 defense pen, that'll get up to more than 100 with his AoE. That's certainly nice. It means that you can even drop the defense pen on this Truststone set should you want. You might be able to use a different stat there, like crit rate instead. And the weapon penetration, the slash res pen, is at 61. So 61, again, I don't love that number. Then again, that'll be totally different with the new vision card coming in the future for Lucio, which is another unit scaling one. So you'd basically swap what this current one is with the new one, and you'd get a lot of slash res pen from that. So all is not done yet with this character. There is still something coming in the future that is going to drastically help him. And from a Truststone perspective, we already walked through most of this. Again, left side, HP, spirit, defense. I like all of those. The right side, agility, aim, I think is totally fine. And similar to A2, I think the attack one is okay. And hear me out on this one. Because he's got so many strong buffs to start the fight, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to be a little bit slower, because it means that your buffs will last longer, if that makes sense. If you go through your 3 turns too quickly, that means your 3 buffs wear off faster. So I like the idea that you maybe keep him just a smidge at average agility, or maybe a smidge below, jack up his attack stat so that, those buffs, they'll last to the fight a little bit longer, and then when you do need to finish off enemies, you'll have the capability to do so. We already saw a snapshot of what I like for the right side. It's pretty similar here. It's entirely equipment dependent though. But yeah, that's the Lucio Light of Brilliance review altogether. Again, this is a really interesting character. He's a good addition to Light. He's an amazing addition to Sword Warrior. The timing is fair. I don't have high hopes for him, but he's certainly going to surprise me, I think. I think he's going to be better in the long term than what I'm giving him credit for. I just don't think like the timing right now is necessarily that time, particularly for what people are spending for the near banners with A2 and 2P kind of being the priority. The expensiveness of the Hollow Vision cards that, although he's a light unit, the adoption rate may not be as high as most light units, particularly because most of you probably already have Wing Stern or Barts who kind of fill a similar role in that current light team. Is he an upgrade? Probably. But I can see why many would pass on him as a unit. But that's my thoughts overall. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later.